When it comes to learning a video game, one of the most important elements you need to get right as a developer is feedback. This is a major part of the UI. When it goes wrong, it can lead to a game being very confusing to play and turn away a lot of people. So for this critical thought, we're going to talk about some of the essential information you need to give to a player, as well as what is considered good feedback and bad feedback in video games and design. As we've spoken about many times before, one of the hardest things to do is teach somebody how to play a game for the first time. From the consumer standpoint, trying to learn all the intricacies and rules can be a very daunting challenge, and for a developer, building a effective UI and a tutorial with its onboarding can be challenging if you're not really thinking about things from a new player's point of view. Now, when it comes to providing the player with feedback, this is an essential part of any kind of learning process. For action-based games, it's very easy to get feedback because it is immediately one-to-one of what the player does and what happens. When I play a game like Super Meat Boy or The End Is Nigh, it goes like this: jump, die, jump, die, jump, die, jump, die, jump, jump, die, jump, die, jump, die, and repeat about 30 times in like the span of 20 seconds. And each one of those, I'm learning what's going on with my jumping angles. Okay, one time I jumped too high, I hit the ceiling, I died. Jump too low, can't make the gap, I die. All this is happening immediately, and I'm able to directly make that or put that information in to move forward. The problem, though, as we know, is when it comes to abstracted and any kind of like RPG style design, where what you do doesn't necessarily translate one-to-one to what's happening on screen. We've all played an RPG where your character swings his mighty sword, the sword connects to the character, miss. And as games have gotten more complicated and they started to use more RPG and abstracted based designs, it becomes harder to actually train somebody as to what is going on. Because at the end of the day, the worst thing that you can do is make it that the player just feels like they're just hitting buttons and, something happens. One time I hit 5 buttons, I win. Hit 5 buttons, I lose. What was the difference? I don't know. And here's an example of how this can get very confusing. I've been playing the game Lobby of Ruina. It's one of my favorite games of this year. It's also one of the worst when it comes to the new player's experience. And a lot of that is with the UI. You see, there's a lot of things that affect what happens on a turn-by-turn basis that the game literally will not tell you about. And unless you already know what's going in or going into a level, you'll have no idea whether you have a snowball's chance in hell of winning. There's a UI feature that's like up there that lets you turn on like all the clashes and all the elements that are going on, and it just becomes like a John Madden nightmare of arrows flinging all over the place on the screen. So here's an example of kind of a question I have to deal with Library of Ruin and see if you can follow along. So if I'm trying to figure out how much damage I'm going to do in a turn, damage is based primarily on the roll of whatever your dice is. So if a dice has 5 to 7, that means I could do at minimum 5 damage and max 7. But let's say I have a power that lets me add 2 to any dice roll. So I put that on. But then let's say the enemy is resistant to my attack. So if the attack goes through, it will only do half damage. However, I also have a bonus that provides plus 2 damage whenever an attack connects. So with all that put together, if the train leaves California at 4:35 p.m., at what time will it arrive in New York? And please leave your answer in the form of narrative exposition. Now, up until the train portion of that, that's all what I need to think about when I play this game. And the UI does nothing to assist you in that front. And it's a very narrow line you have to walk as a developer when it comes to building your UI. Because there is a problem with having too much information as having too little information. Part of what makes good UI design is streamlining the complexities of your game. You don't want your UI to be dozens of arrows all over the place with numbers, randomly moving around on screen. But again, you also don't want, just hit a button and 50 things happen that the player has no idea about, and then maybe they'll win, maybe they'll lose. So what I've learned is that there's two areas or two aspects that the player always needs to know. So the first thing is anything that is incidental or something that relies more on memory rather than mastery. So this is something that we see in a lot of roguelikes and a lot of games that have random events, that the player there's fixed outcomes, but you don't get them on screen. Instead, you're forced to memorize what everything does. So an example of this would be from the Darkest Dungeon, that originally with the curio system, that in order to get the right outcome, you had to use the right item. But it's a fixed option each time. There's always just one correct item to use. But in the first version or in the retail version, you had to memorize this. Or you just had a wiki open. Later on, they add in the option that all you have to do is once you've gotten it right one time, the game will record on your inventory which options you use for the curio and will let you know which one's the right one. An example of how not to do this is from the Binding of Isaac, where you have over 600 unique items at this point, each with their own functionality, and the game will not tell you at all what any of them do, even after you've picked it up one time. And I know there are plenty of modders out there who have put in item descriptions that will pop up. And again, you shouldn't have to rely on outside information in order to play your game. It should be all referenced within the game. Now again though, I know some of you will be thinking, well, you're just telling the player how to play the game. And you see, that's the other extreme of too much information. Imagine playing a game like XCOM, where the entirety of the game is just literally what you do in the tutorial. You click on a character, the screen pops up, move here, shoot. You click on another character, it says, move over here, hunker down. That's not interesting to the player, and the game just plays itself. People aren't get bored like that. And that takes me to the other point. Information that you should display to the player should give them information about the consequences of their actions. You're not telling them what to do, you're telling them what could happen. And those two are very different things. And here's a classic example of what I mean. In many roguelike style games, there is the drink from this mysterious fountain or, puddle of liquid or whatever. And the first time somebody drinks from it, they get deadly poison, does 8 points of damage, they're dead, game over. So the normal response would be, fountain bad, never touch it. But here's the point. Let's say that was the 2 out of 10 bad choice that could have happened. The 6 out of 10 possible choice is full health recovery. And then the good 2 out of 10 chance, free level up. So for the people who got that first bad result without knowing anything else that's going to happen, they're going to extrapolate fountain bad, never touch it. But the point is that there's other options that they don't know about. So a better way to convey this would be on the UI saying, chance of something bad happening, chance of a full heal, chance of something amazing happening. You're not telling the player yes or no to drink from the fountain. You're simply conveying to them what are the possible outcomes that can happen from doing this event. In the next half of this video, I'm going to talk more about Slay the Spire with dynamic UIs. But that's another great example. That I pick up a card, it doesn't tell me which card to play, but the game shows me as clear as day what happens wherever I place this card. If I place on this enemy, it will do 2 to 5 damage. If I place on this enemy, maybe we'll do 3 to 8 because the enemy is weakened. Again, you're not telling the player how to play the game. You're not playing the game for them. You're simply letting them know that if they do X, then option 1, 2, or 3 could happen. And it is up to the player to decide what they want to do. This is again why games like Monster Train, Slay the Spire, and other titles that kind of put the choices onto the player as opposed to being just 100% random and uncontrollable works so well. Again, it's not about giving the player everything they need or telling them exactly what to do. You're simply saying, well, if you do this, this will happen. If you do this, this will happen. Which one do you want to try? Another example of what not to do is from FTL. Anyone who's played FTL remembers those events, and they can swing wildly between, hey, this is amazing, it's going to help with my run totally, to, well, my run's over, that was a killer, we gotta restart. And again, the problem is that the game is not really conveying what could possibly happen. Now, of course, expert players will chime in and say it's just a matter of memorization. You know, what point of interest or event and what are its possible outcomes. Again, that's not how you want to design your game. The player should never have to look outside your game or use outside information like that in order to best enjoy your game. If this information is something that's just, again, a test of memory, just put it on the UI. Just have something there that they can understand that, again, what could happen, not what will happen or what should they do. And when you think about things like this, it makes it a far more interesting game because you're not punishing somebody from having bad short-term memory or punishing them because they got unlucky. You're letting them decide what to do and then letting their choices dictate what's going to happen next. So at the end of the day, what you're trying to achieve is that the player should know exactly why they're winning, why they're losing. Why did this enemy just take 5 times more damage? Why did this character just, smack me and just kill me in one hit? Why is this good? Why is this bad? Because when the player can begin to build up the schema and just internalize how your game is played, it lets them actually enjoy and start thinking about what is happening. And the smoother and the faster you can make that happen, the better your UI and your UX are going to be. So with that said, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to talk about the joys of dynamic UIs, why they're essential for providing feedback, and some really good examples of them. But as always, if you're interested in my books on design, then be sure to check the following out. For entry-level students, we have 20 Essential Games to Study, and then the Game Design Deep Dive series that takes an extensive look at different genres, with horror coming by the end of 2021. When we talk about the idea of dynamic UIs, this is the concept of having UI elements that update in real time. Now, we can of course include the classics of having a life indicator or scores from way back in the arcade industry. But for our purposes today, I want to talk about dynamic UIs kind of in the more advanced form, and that's providing up to the second information as to how things will present themselves. And something like Slay the Spire is a really good example of this. Now, of course, as I'm playing these cards and going in super fast mode here, the game itself, when I am moving cards around and putting things on the field, the game is giving me a really good indicator as to what all my cards are going to do. I know up to the second what can possibly be happening, or what is going to be the outcome of my turn. How much damage am I going to do? How much damage am I going to take? And this information is, well, as we all know, very crucial if you're trying to make decisions when you have a limited number of turns or actions per round. And This is the kind of information that you need to be able to provide the player with. And while Slay the Spire does this really well, we can also see something similar with Monster Train. That Monster Train not only gives you that information, but it goes a step further and actually will update you to let you know when a boss or an enemy is going to die. And this, again, is what I want to see when it comes to feedback in strategy or abstracted-based design. That I don't want to be guessing as to what my actions are going to do. I want to know that if I'm going to do 6 points of damage, the enemy's going to block 3 of that, well, I'm only going to do 3 points of damage. This was the issue that I ran into with Library of Runa that I talked about in the last part. That so much information about what is happening is not really referenced. And so much of learning the game is about trying to figure out what all this stuff means without actually being able to see it impacting. And that's not how you want to design a deep game. Again, when people or when gamers make decisions and titles, you want it to be as one-to-one in terms of the response. If I do X, I want to see what Y is. And this is, again, why 4X and Grand Strategy titles are often so difficult to learn. Is that I do an action, and that result may not show up for another 20 to 50 turns. And how am I supposed to know what I did right or wrong because of that? And this is why I always have trouble learning these games. Whereas something like with the deck building roguelikes and action-based titles, I can see very immediately, because of their UIs, what I did right and what I did wrong. And as we said in the last part, if you're looking for areas to improve in your own game, see where consumers and playtesters are consistently asking questions. Like if you're looking on your forums or your Discord and the same question about a rule or information keeps popping up, that should be a clue for you that maybe that needs to be better referenced in game. And like we've said, the absolute worst thing is for somebody to have to leave your game in order to learn it, or even just play it in general. Now, of course, somebody will try to be, I think, cute and bring up, ARG games. But what we're talking about when it comes to strategy or onboarding the player into learning something, the game needs to provide them with all the information that they need. And when it doesn't, it leads to confusion. Now, with all that said, to wrap things up for our piece this week, good onboarding is all about feedback. That when you do something right or something wrong, you need to see that in game. You need to know that what you're doing is either working or it's not. A very classic example would be many action games or action adventure titles where you can just keep attacking an enemy. It shows you, the enemy responding and you may think they're doing damage, but no, it's a puzzle fight and you're supposed to do something completely different in order to hurt it. And a lot of this, once again, comes back to playtesting. You need to see where people are having trouble. And this is where new player testing can be very important. Because again, your hardcore base, they've internalized everything. They know all the ins and outs, they know the best strategies, they know how to play your game at its best. And any confusion or troubling mechanics, they've already gotten past it. It's the new players that you want to be concerned with. Because at the end of the day, the onboarding and the UI and UX of your game should not be confusing. This is not where you want to have the Dark Souls of approachability or anything like that. Because that's how you churn people, and that's how your game and your franchise as a whole will not grow. Because the harder it is for new people to get into your game, or the more confusing, the less likely you're going to grow your audience. And if you don't grow that audience, your game is never going to reach the mainstream or even people who could become fans of yours. Somebody who's looking for a new deck builder or a new action game. But when they play your version of it, they just completely bounce off of it. So for those of you watching this, can you think of games that did a really great job in providing feedback? And can you think of games that did an exemplary action of approachability? Especially bonus points if it's a complicated or very unique or esoteric design. The developers just were on point and made sure that you understood what was going on by the end of their onboarding or tutorial. Let me know in the comments below. As always, do all the liking and subscribing. Check out our Discord and Patreon. If you'd like to suggest a topic for a future video, let me know. And come back for daily discussions on game design here and on game wisdom, where some of the art and science of games.